For 27 years, we've been asking, who could take a 6-year-old boy and murder him and decapitate him? Who? We needed to know. We needed to know. And today we know.
On July 27, 1981, a mother turned her back on her son for 10 minutes inside a Sears department store in Hollywood, Florida. 10 minutes. That is how long it took for 6-year-old Adam Walsh to vanish from a crowded toy department in the middle of the afternoon. 2 weeks later, 2 fishermen would find part of what was left of him, more than 100 miles away, in a drainage canal beside a rural highway. What followed was not just a murder investigation. It was 27 years of lost evidence, buried confessions, police infighting, and a family who refused to let their son's case die quietly. This is the story of Adam Walsh, and the case so broken it eventually reshaped how America searches for missing children. Hollywood, Florida sits on the coast between Miami and Fort Lauderdale, a mid-sized city known in the early 1980s for its beaches and its quiet, working-class neighborhoods. On the afternoon of July 27, 1981, Reve Walsh took her 6-year-old son Adam to the Hollywood Mall to run a simple errand. She needed a lamp, and the lighting section of the Sears department store was just a few aisles from the toy department. Adam had noticed a small crowd of older boys clustered around a display of Atari video game consoles near the store entrance. He wanted to watch them play. Reve saw no reason to worry. The toy section was close, the store was full of shoppers, and she expected to be gone only a few minutes. She walked to the lighting department to look at lamps. While she was gone, a store security guard approached the group of boys at the video game display. They were getting loud, drawing complaints, and the guard told them to leave the store. Adam, by most accounts a quiet and somewhat timid child, did not speak up to explain that his mother was still inside. He simply followed the older boys out of the building. When Reve returned to the toy department a short time later, her son was gone. At first, she assumed he had wandered to another part of the store. She began checking nearby aisles. Minutes passed. She asked employees if they had seen a small boy in a striped shirt. Nobody had. Sears employees paged Adam over the store intercom. There was no response. By the time Reve Walsh admitted to herself that her son had not simply wandered off, more than an hour had already passed. Hollywood police were called to the scene. In 1981, there was no Amber Alert system. There was no national database for missing children, no coordinated federal response, and no protocol requiring stores to lock down when a child went missing inside them. What existed was a patchwork of local police departments, each operating largely on their own, with no shared standard for how seriously to treat a missing 6-year-old. Hollywood police opened a missing persons case. Officers searched the mall and the surrounding area. Reve and her husband, John Walsh, a hotel developer at the time, began contacting news outlets and organizing volunteers on their own, unwilling to wait for a process that felt too slow for the urgency they felt. Word spread quickly through the South Florida community. Search parties combed nearby canals, wooded lots, and drainage ditches. Flyers with Adam's photograph appeared on storefronts and telephone poles across Broward County. Investigators at the time considered several possibilities, including the chance that Adam had wandered off and gotten lost, or that he had been taken by someone he encountered near the store. There was no ransom demand, no witness who had seen an obvious abduction, and no physical evidence pointing toward a single suspect. Days passed with no answers. Then 2 weeks. For the Walsh family, each day without word became its own form of torment. On August 10, 1981, 2 fishermen working a drainage canal near Highway 60 in rural Indian River County, more than 100 miles north of Hollywood, made a discovery that ended the search and began an entirely different kind of investigation. They found a child's severed head in the water. Investigators were called to the scene. Given the distance from Hollywood and the condition of the remains, identification was not immediate. But dental records confirmed what the Walsh family had feared since the moment their son disappeared. It was Adam. The rest of his body was never recovered, despite extensive searches of the surrounding canal system and wooded areas nearby. The nature of the crime scene told investigators something important. Indian River County was more than 100 miles from where Adam vanished. Whoever had done this had access to a vehicle and had made a deliberate decision to transport him a long distance from Hollywood before disposing of his remains. In 1981, DNA profiling did not yet exist as an investigative tool. Forensic science relied on far more limited methods: fingerprints, blood typing, fiber analysis, and eyewitness accounts. This single fact would shape every difficulty investigators faced over the next 27 years. What should have been a single, focused homicide investigation instead became a jurisdictional tangle almost from the start. Hollywood police had opened the missing persons case. Indian River County authorities now had a homicide scene in their own jurisdiction, more than 100 miles away. Broward County, where Hollywood is located, had its own sheriff's office with resources Hollywood police did not. Coordination between these agencies was inconsistent. Evidence collected in one jurisdiction was not always properly shared or preserved by another. Over the years that followed, this fragmentation would prove costly. Investigators pursued multiple leads and suspects throughout the early and mid-1980s. Tips poured in from across the country, some credible, many not. The Walsh family, frustrated by what they viewed as a slow and disorganized response from Hollywood police, became increasingly vocal in the media, a stance that would define the rest of their lives. John Walsh later said publicly that in the earliest days of the case, federal law enforcement declined to become directly involved, since kidnapping across state lines was required to trigger FBI jurisdiction at the time, and investigators had no evidence Adam had been taken out of Florida. That gap, a murdered child with no clear jurisdiction and no federal involvement, became one of the driving forces behind the Walsh's later advocacy work. In October 1983, more than 2 years after Adam's murder, a drifter named Ottis Toole, then incarcerated at a Florida state prison on unrelated charges, confessed to Hollywood police that he had abducted and killed Adam Walsh. Toole had a documented history of violence and instability. He also claimed a connection to Henry Lee Lucas, a man who separately confessed to dozens of murders across the country, many of which investigators later determined he could not have actually committed. At first, Toole implicated Lucas in Adam's murder as well, but records showed Lucas was in jail in Virginia at the time Adam disappeared, making his involvement impossible. Toole then changed his story, saying he had acted alone. Investigators questioned him repeatedly. Toole's account shifted from interview to interview, sometimes including details that matched the crime, other times including details that did not. He claimed to have buried Adam's body in a specific location. Searches of that location turned up nothing. Without physical evidence connecting Toole directly to the crime, and with his story changing repeatedly, the Broward County State Attorney's Office determined there was not enough to bring formal charges. Toole soon recanted his confession entirely, denying any involvement. He would go on to confess and recant multiple more times over the following years, a pattern that left investigators and the Walsh family in a state of prolonged uncertainty. Was this the man responsible, or a troubled individual drawn to confessing to crimes he had not committed, as he was known to do in other cases as well? As the years passed, the case suffered a series of investigative failures that would later be described by outside reviewers as some of the most damaging in the history of American cold case work. Hollywood police had, at one point, taken possession of Toole's car, a vehicle investigators believed may have been used to transport Adam's remains. Photographs were taken of the car's interior, including the carpet behind the driver's seat, but the physical carpet itself was later lost. Eventually, the car itself was gone as well, disposed of before its potential evidentiary value was fully understood. 98 photographs taken during that early examination of the vehicle sat in storage for years, unreviewed with modern scrutiny. Detectives assigned to the case changed multiple times over the following 2 decades. Files were transferred between officers who had not worked the case from its beginning. Some records were incomplete. Institutional memory of the case's early years faded as the officers who had worked it moved on, retired, or left the department entirely. By the mid-1990s, the case sat cold, a symbol in the community of an investigation that had never been properly resolved, and a source of continued public frustration for the Walsh family. Ottis Toole died in prison on September 15, 1996, of liver failure while serving a sentence for unrelated crimes. He was never tried for Adam's murder. He died having both confessed to and denied it multiple times over the years, leaving the question formally unresolved. While the official investigation stalled, John Walsh transformed his grief into a national platform. In 1988,
He became the host of America's Most Wanted,
a television program that profiled fugitives and unsolved cases, asking viewers to call in tips. The show ran for more than 2 decades and was credited with contributing to the capture of hundreds of wanted individuals. John and Reve Walsh also became central figures in advocating for changes to how missing children cases were handled nationally. Their efforts contributed directly to the creation of the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children and to federal legislation improving how law enforcement agencies coordinate on child abduction cases. Florida, prompted in part by Adam's case, became the first state to establish a centralized clearinghouse for missing children. Retail chains, including Walmart, later adopted what became known as the Code Adam Protocol, a store-wide alert and lockdown procedure used whenever a child is reported missing inside a retail location, a direct response to exactly the kind of 10-minute gap that had taken Adam from his mother's side. None of this brought the case to a formal legal resolution, but it meant that a broken system, the same one that had failed the Walsh family in 1981, was rebuilt in the years that followed, largely because of their advocacy. In 2006, at Reve Walsh's request, retired Miami Beach homicide detective Joe Matthews agreed to review the case from the beginning. Matthews spent months working through more than 10,000 pages of case files, old interview transcripts, and evidence logs that had accumulated since 1981. Among the material he reviewed were the 98 photographs taken of Ottis Toole's car more than 2 decades earlier, images that had never been closely examined with the benefit of everything investigators had since learned about the case. Matthews later stated that one image in particular, taken of the carpet behind the driver's seat of Toole's vehicle, appeared to show a faint impression consistent with a young child's face, a mark he believed was left in blood. Matthews compiled his findings into a report and presented them to Hollywood Police Chief Chadwick Wagner, who had become interim police chief in January 2008. It is worth noting that Matthews's conclusions, and the process by which they were reached, were later publicly disputed by other investigators who had worked the case over the years, including detectives who maintained they were never convinced Toole was responsible at all. That disagreement has never been fully resolved in public record, and remains a point of contention among those who worked the case. On December 16, 2008, Hollywood Police Chief Chadwick Wagner stood before reporters, with John Walsh, Reve Walsh, and Adam's siblings present, and announced that the department was officially closing its investigation. Police said they were satisfied that Ottis Toole, the man who had confessed and recanted multiple times before his death 12 years earlier, was responsible for Adam's abduction and murder. No charges were ever filed. There would be no trial. Toole had been dead for over a decade, and the physical evidence that might have proven the case beyond doubt. The carpet, the car itself, had long since been lost. John Walsh addressed reporters that day, saying that for 27 years his family had needed to know who had taken his son, and that they finally did. Not everyone was convinced. An Associated Press review of the documents released alongside the announcement found no new physical evidence beyond the photographs Matthews had re-examined. Some journalists and investigators who had followed the case for decades openly questioned whether the closure represented genuine resolution or simply a department eager to close its most notorious unsolved file. The truth is that both things may be accurate at once. Police believed and continue to believe that they identified their killer, and the case was closed without the kind of evidence that a courtroom would have required to convict him had he lived to face trial. More than 4 decades after Adam Walsh disappeared from a Sears department store on an ordinary summer afternoon, his case remains one of the most consequential in American criminal justice history, not because of how it ended, but because of everything it changed along the way. The Code Adam Protocol used in stores across the country, the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, federal legislation improving cooperation between law enforcement agencies on child abduction cases, all of it traces back, at least in part, to a family that refused to let their son become just another cold file in a records room. Adam Walsh would be in his late 40s today. Instead, his name is permanently tied to a single summer afternoon in 1981, and to everything that happened and failed to happen in the 27 years that followed. The case is closed. Whether it is truly finished is a question that has never fully gone away,